Hi, folks. Ryan Honeyman here from Lift Economy. Many folks have come to us over the last 10 years and asked, how do I get more involved in creating an economy that works for the benefit of all life? They also ask, what skills and experiences do I need to help make this transition? So 3 years ago, we created something called the Next Economy MBA to help address this and similar questions. Lift Economy's Next Economy MBA is an online course that's designed for entrepreneurs, aspiring entrepreneurs, students, recent graduates, employees, and folks who want to learn more about transformational next economy strategies and businesses. Join the growing alumni network of nearly 250 alumni who've gone through this program and learned essential skills and hopefully built lifelong relationships for catalyzing businesses in the emergent and regenerative economy. So we encourage you to check out our course. You can go to lifteconomy.com/MBA. The next course, Cohort 7, starts on September 21st, 2021. So once again, go to www.lifteconomy.com/MBA. And now, on with the show. Welcome to Next Economy Now. The goal of this podcast series is to highlight the leaders who are taking a regenerative, bioregional, equitable, democratic, racially just, and whole systems approach to creating the new economy. Sheryl, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you, Ryan. I'm so thrilled to be here. So thrilled that we met.
Yeah, we met at Natural Products Expo West, for folks who don't know what that is. It's, maybe that would be actually an interesting piece, is this largest food and beverage or natural products expo. You've probably been attending for many years.
Yes. There's about, I think it's 90,000 people who attend now. And when I started going, when I was with Clif Bar in 1998, it was all about Birkenstocks and tie-dye shirts. Yes, it has changed dramatically.
And Sheryl, maybe just to start a little bit about your background, where are you from originally? And are you from the California area?
No, and believe it or not, I was actually born in Mississippi and moved from Mississippi when I was 2 years old. And we moved to Michigan. So I thought for the longest time, Michigan was the only place in the world. And then I discovered New York and California, and I was like, okay, got to get moving.
That's great. I think you're one of the few people I've met who were born in Mississippi. That's an awesome little asterisk tidbit for me to know about.
Yeah, I was 2 years old, so I don't remember a bit of it, but there you go.
And, when you were first maybe in college and looking to what you wanted to do with your career, did you ever think that you'd spend your whole career in food, or was that sort of a random thing?
Well, I never thought I would spend my career in business because I grew up with a single mom, and I was very into issues around social justice, and I was going to, change the world. And my best friend lived next door, and we just dreamed of all the things we were going to do. And I actually had decided I wanted to go into psychology because I thought that was such a great way to be able to help people. And then my mom had said to me, she could no longer pay for school. And I was terrified because here I'd been raised by a single mom, money wasn't available. And one of my biggest fears was not being able to take care of myself. So I went into business, and I really struggled with it for the longest time. In fact, this best friend when I told her, I was talking to her on the phone, she went to Michigan State, I went to Michigan, and I told her that I was going into business, and literally she said, "Shame on you," and hung up on me.
Wow.
So I struggled with that for a long, long time until I discovered a new way, like you're talking about with the intro you just did in this podcast.
Yeah, I'm curious, it looks like some of your first work experience was at very large companies like Kraft and Quaker Oats. What was your experience working at those larger companies?
Well, they were great companies to work for from the standpoint that it really taught you how to be a classically good marketer. And when I decided to go into business, I thought, well, the closest thing to psychology was marketing because it was the study of people. And so I learned such great skills to bring into my companies, but I was taught in those companies that I had to, at least at the time, the philosophy was you had to distance yourself from the consumer. You had to watch them like animals in the cage and analyze the data. And you could not, God forbid, I was actually told I wanted to work on Gatorade, and I was told that I should never say that I was an athlete because I never get the chance to work on the brand because I'd be considered too close to it. So that's what I had learned until I walked into Clif Bar and walked into a completely different world.
Yeah, how did you first hear about Clif Bar? I'm kind of curious that origin story.
Yeah, I was running on the Chicago waterfront, and this was in 1997 with a buddy of mine, and he always gave me like the best things, like here's the inside scoop on what events to go to, or how to time your practices and all that kind of stuff. And he handed me my first Clif Bar, and at the time I had been in brand management and learned how to run businesses, and I thought, I'd really would love to be a part of a company that was about the outdoors and, being an athlete. And I saw he introduced me to Clif Bar, and I'm like, oh, this is great. It doesn't taste like the bars I remember that are so taffy. And it just so happened 3 days later, I got my alumni newsletter, and there was a posting listed to start a brand management function at Clif Bar. So I literally jumped at the chance. I just couldn't believe it. It was such serendipity.
Tell us a little bit more about Clif Bar. Like, what was it a huge difference once you started working there compared to the corporate culture of some of the other places you worked at?
Well, I'll tell you that story by starting on the day that I walked into the door to interview at Clif Bar. So I go into Berkeley. I flew out from New York, and I walk into the building, and these dogs were greeting me at the door, and I saw bikes hanging out the wall, but I couldn't find any people. So I walked through the company, and literally in the back of the building in front of this gigantic climbing wall was the whole entire company participating in a stretching class. And then Gary Erickson, who is the co-founder and now owner of Clif Bar, jumps up with his 4-year-old daughter and calls me into his office. And we're sitting there, and he pops his daughter up on his lap, and he starts asking me questions. And in between, he's kind of whispering with her. And all of a sudden, I was just stunned. I was like, here's the owner of this company, but he is talking to me as a dad, as a husband, as a baker, as an athlete. He was himself, bringing his full self. And it was so different from what I had experienced. And so I just had to jump at the chance to work there. And what Gary taught me about was how important love is, to bring love into every aspect of what you do at work. And, starting with the product and how he came out with the product out of his love of cycling. And from there, it really helped us to be able to conceive of the idea for Luna Bar.
Yeah, you were one of the key originators of Luna Bar within Clif, right?
Yeah, well, as Gary taught me how to dig deep, I started digging deep into myself, and I realized, I liked Clif Bars a lot, but I was using them mostly when I was doing a hardcore workout. And I realized that at that time, the category was not being used by women at all. And I started talking to other women in the company, and they felt the exact same way, that we really wanted a bar that was, lighter, not as many calories, that we can use on a daily basis, that had nutrients that were specific to us as women. And also talk to us, because the bars at the time were all about men and muscle. And we came up with this idea of Luna Bar, and Gary created, which he's so brilliant at doing, this beautiful bar. And we launched it without hardly any support because we didn't have any money. It was a privately held company, barely getting by. And it became a $70 million business in about 3 years. So what we learned from that was that we just opened up a huge amount of pent-up demand by women who just didn't feel serviced by the category. And here, this shattered my world in terms of what can happen if you are so passionately connected to the product, which was so different than I learned as a classically trained marketer.
I'm kind of curious how the company reacted once Lara Bar, kind of like the competitor bar, came onto the market. Was that sort of a, wow, like these big multinationals putting out a product that's try and match us?
We faced that much earlier than that because of our competitors were getting bought out. Power Bar was bought by Nestle, Balance Bar was bought by Kraft, and this was in the year 2000, so it was before Larabar. And we were told as a privately held company that we would never make it. So literally, Gary was sitting in his office with the investment bankers, the lawyers, and the company that was going to buy Clif Bar, and he was moments away from signing the company away with his 50-50 co-founder standing there waiting waiting for this contract to get signed. And he looked up and he said to everyone in the room, I can't sell my company. And they were floored, and she was pissed. And so we took on at the time a $45 million loan on a $90 million company. And that
Wow.
was not investment capital. That was to buy her out. And so we struggled for a few years there, but Gary began to articulate this vision for a company, which at the time was very unusual. You only heard the Body Shop and Ben and Jerry's talking about it, but he said, I want to use the power of this company to make a difference in the world. And here, I was like stunned because I shared with you, Ryan, this story about how I had wanted to be able to address social issues as a kid. And here my mind was blown. Like, if this is possible, business could be the most powerful force of change in the world. And fast forward, and I got the honor of being asked to be CEO in 2004 and was able to see what would happen by working on operationalizing this vision, this beautiful vision that Gary had. And I saw, everything changed. The amazing effort and emotional and spiritual connection that people had, everyone on our team, behind this idea. And none of us had any physical equity at the time, me included, but we all felt like we owned the company. And we moved mountains because of that. And we were able to measure progress against all 5 of Gary's bottom lines that he had, which again, at the time, everyone only talked about one. And I was just floored by this. And I got the entrepreneurial bug. And that's when I wanted to start a company with Neil Grimmer, who's a brilliant product innovator and branding guy who I'd hired over at Clif Bar. And we decided to spin out of Clif Bar to start a company called the Nest Collective, which is now known as Plum.
That's right. Neil worked at Clif, I forgot, and then
Yeah.
co-founded Plum with you. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, talk about that a little bit.
So, we started thinking about and dreaming about what kind of company would we want to be a part of? Where would we want to put our time and effort and heart and soul? And thought to our own lives, just like we had learned from Gary. And at the time we had young kids, mine were 8 and 5. And we were both, Neil and I, separately, we're not married, both with our spouses, being with very busy spouses, we're having a really hard time finding food for our kids that was healthy and organic, but also really tasted really yummy and good, and that the packaging was attractive to kids. If you walked through the Whole Food stores at this time, this was in 1997, it was just, nothing in there looked attractive. And Neil and I thought, well, we can try to be purists about this. But at the same time, we felt like, gosh, if we can bridge the gap between healthy and organic and convenient and great tasting and beautiful looking, beautifully designed, that would be huge in getting more people to embrace the idea of organic and healthy. And so we set that out for our company as a mission to help kids develop a lifetime love of healthy eating. And it was awesome. It was also extremely, extremely stressful.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious, when you're starting a food company, especially natural products, seems like a hot category. How do you grow the company without selling out to bad investors who sort of want to only make as much money as possible? Can you talk about a little bit about how you did that at Plum, like what you were thinking about, and then how that worked at starting to work at Rebel?
Yeah, and I definitely encourage people to read my book, Killing It, because I talk about this issue and many others that come along with entrepreneurship. The first dollar that you take can change the course of your startup and where it goes. And so really understanding that and taking that very seriously is critical. And it's very hard when you start a company, especially a natural foods company, where you need money for inventory and things like that. And banks aren't willing to do it when you have no kind of inventory to be able to give them in the beginning. And over time, it's still hard. But it's so incredibly important, and I'll tell you a story about that. We had an investor that we've had a number of investors in Plum, but we had one of our investors that we took. Seemed great from a big picture standpoint, but I didn't do my homework enough. And this investor was really, really difficult to deal with. It was like a playground bully. And his idea of motivating was to keep you guessing as to what mood he was going to be in. One day, he was so excited and everything was great. And the next thing, you're doing an awful job. Everything's falling apart. And also didn't know the industry all that well. And so it made it additionally challenging because we started chasing, and we had a lot of people actually in the company that didn't know the industry, a lot of investors. And so we were chasing our tail all the time. And, it was getting incredibly, incredibly stressful. And instead of talking to people about it, I thought it's my fault. I couldn't handle it. And I come to find out years later that every single entrepreneur that had worked with this investor had the same exact experience. And it's such a shame because we could have helped each other. We could have helped each other to not take him as an investor. But we were, as many entrepreneurs are, so busy about saying how everything's great with us and our companies. We're always talking about how great everything is, that we missed this opportunity to be able to help each other. And it was such a shame. And so I say that to say, got to do your homework. Investors they're taking every single person that you put on the recommended list for them to call, and they're finding every single person that's not on the list to call. And the mistake I made is I just took that list. And so what I should have done is find every other person that he hadn't told me to talk to. So we've got to be very clear as to what is our vision for the company, what is important to us as a company. And with and this well, but given the book that you wrote, for us, being a B Corp was a very important step. Now, it was more challenging to be a B Corp at the time. And I don't know, Ryan, if we need to define B Corp.
Well, it's just a company that's been certified by B Lab to have met rigorous standards of social and environmental performance. So it's basically like certification. It's kind of like organic for milk or fair trade for coffee, but it's a certification for the whole company.
So what's helpful about that, even more so now than before, is before it was written into your bylaws, but there was not legal protection. And now there's legal protection in many states around the country, including California and Delaware, which is amazing. So having B Corp status can really help you to make sure that those values are found throughout the company and that they can't be stripped away. And we were at Plum lucky enough that we were sold to Campbell's, but I had already left the company to go work for Stanford, but they had embraced the idea of B Corp, and they knew it was so integral to the brand that Campbell's actually allowed Plum to stay a B Corp within their company, which is amazing. And so now we are on that path to become a B Corp with my company, Rebel Super Herb Beverages, that we can talk about. But also right from the beginning, we changed our approach into how we got investors. And I have some of the most amazing investors and board members I have ever worked with in my whole entire life, from every aspect to what they believe is the purpose of the company to how they embrace vulnerability and are as vulnerable as themselves as I am with them in getting support.
Yeah, let's jump into Rebel. For folks who don't know, what is Rebel and what does the name stand for?
Yeah, so Rebel, that's a good question because people don't all know that it's actually an acronym. So it's spelled REBBL, and it actually stands for roots, extracts, berries, barks, and leaves. And that's what's in the product. It's a super herb beverage. But it's also it's about the attitude of the product, which is that there's a different way that we can go on, a different path. And Ryan, again, the way you open the show, this is exactly what you're trying to do with this podcast and encouraging companies to do it. So we celebrate the Rebel in everybody, and we honor that ourselves in our company.
Yeah, and maybe describe some of the products, some amazing flavors and ingredients that I don't think many people have heard combinations of.
So, Rebel is this coconut milk-based elixir. And it's organic and, of course, non-GMO. It's made with the purest of ingredients. You read the label, and it is pure to the core. It's the best of the plant queendom. We don't use thickeners or stabilizers or artificial or natural flavors. It's all the real stuff. And it's so exquisite tasting. I can't, people don't even really believe it until they try it. And literally, we have a Rishi chocolate that tastes, Rishi is the super herb that I could talk about in a second, but it tastes like a chocolate milk. And the flavors are just there's a turmeric golden milk and a new turmeric lemon tart that's actually over in Whole Foods. They're exquisite tasting because Paulo Hawken, who is the co-founder and chief innovation officer of the company, he's brilliant at the art of food. And every single company I've been part of, that has been paramount to me, that people who are creating the products understand the art of food. We can put all the science thinking behind it that we want, but if the food doesn't taste beautiful, people are not going to be attracted to it on, in a more mass scale. And for us, if we want to change lives and help people to be healthier, our way of doing it is through the doorway of taste. And I could tell you about these super herbs, which people may or may not be familiar with. Can I do that?
Yeah, I'd love to hear.
Yeah, so there's super herbs like turmeric. A lot of people are now familiar with turmeric. It's very, very popular, and it has these anti-inflammatory properties, antioxidant. And there are also these herbs that are just starting to be known, which are called adaptogens. And those are things like reishi mushroom and maca and ashwagandha. And what these herbs do, specifically, like if you take a look at ashwagandha, they've been around for the millennia. But yet we're just starting to see, and ashwagandha has a lot of clinical research behind it that shows that it actually helps your body to mitigate stress, your individual body. So if you are overstressed, it will help calm you down. If you're under stress, it actually gives you energy. So it literally adapts to your body. And these are becoming much, much more popular now. People are starting to realize they're out there. They've been the biggest talk of the natural product show for the past couple of years. And the product works. Like if you try it, you go to a yoga class or another kind of workout or in between meals, you literally will feel a difference with the product.
So Sheryl, it seems like one of the key things that most socially responsible businesses need is you need to have a quality product that competes on par with sort of business as usual product, right? So it sounds like Rebel already has an amazing taste. Can you talk a little bit about the mission of stopping human trafficking in business supply chains?
Yeah, so with pleasure I can talk about it because this drives us every day, every single one of us at Rebel. We were actually started by a nonprofit called Not for Sale, and Not for Sale's goal is to eradicate modern day human trafficking. And just to give folks who are listening a sense of it, as many people don't know this, that there are 30 million people around the world that are impacted by trafficking, and it's 80% women and girls. And even in this country, there's estimated to be about 250,000 people that are impacted by trafficking here. And it's starting to be talked about more, which is a really important thing because it's a scary topic for people to think about. It's the slave trade and the sex trade, things that we thought were probably long gone until we open our eyes to the fact that it is the fastest growing illegal industry in the world. It is second behind the drug trade in terms of how big it is. It's even bigger than the illegal weapons trade. So it's an issue that must be addressed. And so we were born out of that. And to this day, it is very important to us. So we give 2.5% of our net sales, not profit, but net sales of every bottle of Rebel back to Not for Sale to do the work that they're doing to rehabilitate people that have been trafficked. But also we work with growers throughout the world, and we make sure that they have a livelihood and that they have access to things like clean water and healthcare and education, because we know that by protecting against those conditions, then they're not going to be vulnerable to trafficking to begin with. And we also, and this is a big initiative that was kicked off by a group that I'm proudly part of, called OSC Squared. It's a group of companies dedicated to pushing beyond sustainability, kicked off in the industry, if anyone was at the Natural Products Show on Wednesday, a climate collaborative, which is an effort to help to change where we are as an industry, to help us to become leaders in actually what we're talking about is reversing climate change, which is something that Paul Hawken, the author of a book called Project Drawdown, is helping to prove that there is a way to reverse climate change. So Rebel is taking a leadership role as part of the group because of the fact that when people are subjected to conditions of drought, And what happens with climate change, they become even more desperate, and then they become even more vulnerable to trafficking. So this drives us every day. It is deeply meaningful to us. It's why we're doing what we're doing.
It's a fascinating point because I don't think many people tie climate change to the social impacts like human trafficking. So I think that's really important that you highlight that.
Yeah. It's a huge issue, and it's connected to the planet too, because as the planet dries up, people can't plant their crops, and yes, they become desperate.
And so you're also, we mentioned at the top of the podcast, the author of the book that just came out last fall called Killing It. I wonder if you could just give folks maybe the brief summary of the book and maybe some of the key reasons that led you to want to write it.
Yeah, well, the book, as you said, is called Killing It, and it came out actually in December. And the reason why I wrote it is that, now I run this company, Rebel, that I've been talking about, that I love with all my heart and soul, and I'm doing it in a healthy way. But I learned the hard way, the way most entrepreneurs do. And this became very, very obvious to me when I was running the Center for Entrepreneurial Studies over at the Stanford GSB after I had left Plum, and realized that, many aspiring entrepreneurs have no idea what it's about. And at Stanford, especially here, you have people with, they have billionaires teaching their classes, and Sand Hill Road, there's money growing off of the trees in Silicon Valley. And I wanted to hold them and say, yes, keep your dreams top of mind and stay in love with this idea. But don't lose sight of the fact that this is really hard. And there is a reason why 95% of businesses fail. And you can't fall along with it. And killing it is literally a double entendre in terms of so many entrepreneurs being out there, and they're might be trying to kill it, but they're killing themselves in the process. And I wanted to change that because it seems obvious that if you're not healthy, your company will not survive. And yet entrepreneurs around the country are succumbing to depression, drug abuse, and even suicide as they grow their businesses. And we could talk about this more. Anorexia was my personal demon, but I've been around enough to see that there are many entrepreneurs dealing with their own demons. So in a sense, my book picks up where The Lean Startup by Eric Ries leaves off, which many people listening to this might be familiar with because it's been so popular in Silicon Valley. But what Eric talks about is all the things that have to do with testing your product and getting it ready for market and putting the right systems in place. But mine starts where that leaves off, which is how to scale your business, but also what comes with the territory emotionally with doing a business. And so it's really the build phase of the company that catches many entrepreneurs off guard.
Do you find that entrepreneurs, in your experience, who have purpose-driven, it's funny, even the term purpose-driven is, I feel like, co-opted a little bit. Like people be like, Facebook is purpose-driven. They're trying to, and I guess when I say purpose-driven, I mean like creating social and environmental positive benefits to society in like a specific way. But I don't know, maybe you have some thoughts on, does the killing it on the personal side, is it tied to sort of the impact, the sort of larger mission or purpose of the business itself, or are those two not quite as related?
It's a great question. And I think at the same time, there's a relation, but there's not, because there's so many people in the Valley. You hear, in fact, actually, I believe that CNN in April is running something about Silicon Valley and depression, a miniseries, because it is such a problem in the Valley. So I think it is just the nature of the fact that you're creating this from scratch. Many people's identities, whether or not it has a social mission, and that is amped big time when you do, but your identities are mixed up with it. So as the company fails, what happens is people feel like, or even as your P&L goes up and down, people are feeling like failures, as I know I felt. And by the way, and your net worth, which I also experienced in a business that we started, a family business that my husband started at the same time we started Plum. We can talk about that more, but why we did that at the same time is I'll never fully understand. But your net worth many times is also wrapped up in it. And, one of the biggest learnings for me in recovering from anorexia was how to separate my self-worth from that, and knowing that your self-worth does not equal the net worth of your company. You are going to go on way beyond your company. Your company does not say everything about who you are. And again, if 95% of companies fail, we have to redefine what we're even thinking success means for a startup.
Is there one or two things that across entrepreneurs lead to more resilient outcomes in the sort of personal side? Like, do you find a common theme or two that like folks, these are the people who if they had this in place, they were usually better off than these people?
Well, I think what is important is to not go where we all want to go as entrepreneurs, which is making ourselves isolated and working all of the time and locking out the rest of the world. And it's those relationships. So we can talk about two things. One, a tribe of entrepreneurs to have that you can really open up to, be authentic and be vulnerable. And on the other side of it, your relationships, nurturing those with your friends and family that know you way beyond your company, that love you no matter what. And when times get tough, they can be a canary in the coal mine to tell you that something's going wrong. So those two things, and we can deep dive into each if you'd like, are essential to the health of an entrepreneur. Having people that you can talk to and be vulnerable with.
Yeah, let's dive into that. So what are some of those things that you'd recommend to entrepreneurs on either of those?
Yeah. So in terms of your tribe of entrepreneurs, when I talk about tribe, what I mean by is this is a silly example, but a tribe is people that really understand you because they're going through it too. So you think of like football fans who are consoling each other or high-fiving each other, but they all know what each other is going through. And entrepreneurs, we're a tribe too, because we know deeply what each other is going through, but yet we don't connect as one many times because we're so busy saying how everything's great. And we do that for a reason, a very good reason with a lot of people, which is, hey, when you're starting your company and all you have is really a vision, you're the one who's got to be out there and being the cheerleader and believing deeply in this vision and what it could possibly become in the world. And you have investors and employees you want to bring on and suppliers you need to convince. So, yeah, you need to talk about everything's great, but there needs to be a time and a place to say, I'm worried, I'm scared, I'm having trouble sleeping, I feel like I'm falling apart. And there's ways to find those people if we're willing to open up. A relatively easy way to do it. And I was just talking to this wonderful woman today who had called me just to reach out and say that she needed help and she needed to find a way to get help. And so there's organizations like YPO, which is the Young Presidents Organization. There is Entrepreneurs Organization. There's groups like the Social Venture Network in our space. There's groups like my group, OSC Squared, where these are people that get you, that there is a dynamic created that you can open up. And I always say to people, you need to use the great tribesperson test, which is, can you cry in front of these people? And I know it's not just women crying. There were men crying, sobbing in those meetings, just, shedding their soul. And that's what you need to make sure that you've got people like that to help you get through. And if you're not wanting to join an organization like that, forming one on your own, talking to other people that you click with and say, hey, can we share some stories of what we're going through? And if worse comes to worse, just at least find somebody that you can talk to, that you can open up to about. It's so essential. And the thing that's funny and sad is that, there was this, when I left Plum, I used to call myself a recovering entrepreneur, because there's so many of us out there. It's all the people that have been through it, that they're the ones that say, well, you know what? It was freaky and hard beyond belief, and it almost killed me. But the people who are going through it in the midst of it are afraid to talk about it. And we've got to change that.
And maybe the smart ex-entrepreneurs are the ones who just sit on a bunch of boards and just advise other people. They don't do it anymore.
They don't. I know if they got smart. So here I am doing it again, but I've learned to do it very differently. But I think you bring up an important point, which is finding advisors and board members who have been through it. And I have the gift on my board of having two people. One, Mark Rampola, who is the founder of Zico Coconut Water, and also Dwayne Primovich, who ran many businesses at Boulder Brands, and he spun out to start his own firm called Bigger with Carol Byers from Boulder Brands, and also Bill Weiland, who is the god of the consumer products industry, one of the largest, or is the largest natural food broker, and he founded the company. And so I have these people on my board that have been through it. They get it. They know how hard it can be, and they know what is required of a business like ours to grow it and how important it is to lean into it to make it happen, and that there's going to be ups and downs along the way. And I'll tell you, I know I have a gift, but I think there's more and more people out there. And if you can't find them on your board, get them as advisors. We just completely open up to each other. And I tell him my fears. I tell him things are going so well in the company that it terrifies me sometimes when I wake up in the morning, because I'm wondering when the next thing is going to go wrong. And he opens up to me about the fears that he has about being being his own firm for the first time. Those are the kind of people that you want to surround yourself with. They're out there.
I love that advice. And I think, like you said, some of those networks of people is a great way to find it. Like I think especially SVN, BCorp, and there's conscious capitalism. It's a great amount of growing networks of entrepreneurs who want to use business for good.
Yes, those are wonderful, wonderful organizations. We're on the path to be a B Corp with Rebel and Conscious Company. I'm speaking there actually pretty soon. It's a wonderful organization.
Besides your own book, which book do you most often give as a gift?
That is a wonderful question. I'll say, this is going to sound like a strange one, but I read Joseph Campbell's book. Are you familiar with Joseph Campbell?
Oh, yeah.
Well, and I don't know if your listeners are, but the guy is the master, and he really integrated so many things, the arts, medicine, business, anything you could think of. He brought this worldview together through the power of myth, through the power of storytelling, and how the storytelling and the arc of, he talks about the hero's journey, which for entrepreneurs, you gotta read this, because it really tells you about the journey that you're going on as an entrepreneur. And I just think some of the things, he was so ahead of his time. He's since passed away, but he was so ahead of his time in being able to help you get grounded on what is important in life. And I think, again, it goes back to how important that is for entrepreneurs to keep that big picture perspective in mind, not just for the health of yourself, your family, your friends, and everyone in your company, but also it's important for the health of the business. And in companies like the ones we're talking about, is how do you keep nurturing that company and nurturing that culture and really tapping into the humanity of the people in our companies, because a company is biological with the people in it. And so I obsess an obsessive amount of time on the culture in our company, because I know that culture is going to permeate through everyone's life who is part of that culture. It's going to permeate through the brand in terms of how we present ourselves in the world, and that it's got to be authentic through and through. It's going to come from all of us in the company. So yeah, I always recommend and give the Joseph Campbell book, The Hero's Journey.
I love that. I was not expecting it. Now I'm going to have to I haven't read that specific one, so I'll put it on my list. It's great.
It was actually, I just read it's actually a biography that was written on him that was also called The Hero's Journey. He has his own book called that, and the biography was outstanding.
Here's another brain teaser question. What do people never ask you that you wish they did?
Oh, wow. That is a brain teaser question. Well, I think it's probably, what is my absolute favorite thing to do in the whole world? And it's on Friday night with my husband. We sit in front of the fireplace, whether that be outside or inside, and we just talk. And the conversation goes everywhere from how was our day to, talking about politics to talking about philosophy. And those Friday nights are so important and grounding to me. I come out of those Friday nights like just ready to take on the world, and coming out of there able to just give so much love to my family. It just reminds me why I'm in the world, is connecting with my husband in a very, very loving way and holding his hand. So that is the most important moment to me of every single solitary week.
That's so awesome. That's such a good question that I'm going to ask future interviewees. What's your absolute favorite thing to do in the world?
I love that question. Yes, it tells you a lot about the person, doesn't it?
So what about we've mentioned a few other folks in the past, 50 minutes or so. Who else are you watching? Who inspires you in this sort of business for good, or, climate change, or these sort of areas that we've kind of touched on in the last little bit?
Oh, yeah. Well, two people, and they're related. So Paulo Hawken, who again is the co-founder and chief innovation officer of the company, who I just think so highly of in terms of his understanding of the art of food and so much about the health aspects of food emotionally, spiritually, and physically. And also his worldview is so interesting, and it helps really shape where we go as a company. And his dad happens to be Paul Hawken, who I had mentioned before. He had written Blessed Unrest. He's really considered like the father of sustainability. The man is brilliant. I actually met Paulo through him, and our first conversation, you ever be in those conversations where you feel like it's such an out-of-body experience? You're just like living on a different dimension. It was one of those conversations. The man is amazing. And what he's done is, in his book, Project Drawdown, that he's just launching now, he has done the first of its kind scientific study through the data. It's based purely on data as to what the top 50 things are in the world that can be done to reverse climate change. And so, believe it or not, when you talk to people, experts, and you say, what is the biggest factor that has created climate change? Nobody knows. They're actually giving you their expert opinion, but no one knows based on data. This study now has the data. And what I find so fascinating about it is that, for example, the top 6 thing that can be done to reverse climate change is educating girls around the world. Another one on the list that's near the top is family planning. So educating girls and family planning together make up the number one thing that we can change around the world to help to reverse climate change. Wow. And it's based purely on data. It is fascinating. I can't wait to read the book because I've heard so much about the study. And Paul had actually presented at the Natural Products Expo again on Wednesday during this Climate Collaborative Initiative. So it is critical stuff for people who care about the planet and care about human beings.
It's funny because I had Tom Steyer on the podcast
last
week, and he talked about it, and then I interviewed Daniel Goleman, from the guy who wrote Emotional Intelligence, and he mentioned the book. And now you've
God.
So my listeners, if you have a hint, you should check out Project Drawdown by Paul Hawken. It's an amazing book. So
wow, that's awesome. That's great. I'm so glad to hear he's getting a lot of support behind it.
So maybe last 2 questions here, Sheryl. First, what do you need right now? How can people support you in this sort of growing the next economy?
Oh, God, Ryan, what a generous, wonderful question. And I would say 2 things. One is buy Rebel, because it helps us to be able to give more and more money back to Not for Sale, and helps growers throughout the world that we're working with. And I would say number 2 is I'd love people to check out the book, get the book on, whether it be on Amazon or in Barnes & Noble and a local bookstore. Please check it out, because the people that have read it have really said that it's helped them to understand that there can be a very different conversation, and it's helped people that what they've said to me as I don't feel crazy anymore. So please help make this conversation happen so that we can really create a very different way of approaching our startups in a much healthier way. And if you don't do it for yourself, do it for your companies, because your health as entrepreneurs is so essential to the health of the company.
And is there a website or where people can contact you or learn more about your work?
Yeah, well, they can go on Rebel at rebel.co.com. And I'm at Sheryl O'Loughlin. That's SheryLOUGHLIN.com. And you can also follow Rebel on Facebook and Twitter at Rebel Elixirs. And my Facebook is Sheryl O'Loughlin Author.
Next Economy Now is a production of Lift Economy. To listen to all of our episodes, go to lifteconomy.com/podcast. That's LIFT economy.com/podcast. You can also sign up for our monthly newsletter at lifteconomy.com/newsletter. Please also rate and review our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.